and welcome to Wait, It Gets Better, the improvisational storytelling podcast. We are here at the end of a story to talk about it with you. I'm, of course, Levi.
I'm Reed.
And I'm Seth.
And we are here to talk about a story with you. How's it going, guys? You guys doing good?
Right?
Yeah.
That's great. We are talking about The Fallen Sky today. Do you guys remember that one?
The sequel to The New Dawn.
Correct. The sequel to The New Dawn. If you haven't listened to that, this is to both of you guys and for our hundreds of thousands of loyal listeners. Just go back, listen to it. This is just the recap episode where we talk about cool ideas we had, if we thought they paid off or not. So that's all this is. So this, for me, I've been reading the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson. This story for me was kind of a mix of some of Brandon Sanderson's work, One Piece, Dune, what else? Was there any other interesting sort of inspirations for you guys on this last story?
Well, yeah, I have to give credit. I had the middle episode. My story element was reoccurring character.
Yeah.
And I found a character from an old, going back to like 4 years ago. And he was Lord Ravenous, and he was kind of lifted from the Stargate series, where you had the gold, where you had
Right.
like the pyramids and stuff were like landing pads for their starships, but they were an advanced civilization that had powers, so they appeared godlike to primitive people. And then they would use effects to enhance that because they got compliance and got slave labor. It's a lot easier to get people to be a slave for you if you're their god, right? And you
Absolutely.
can dish out, reward and punishment in dramatic, inexplicable, technologically inexplicable. I could say inexplicable. Sorry, but anyway, he was definitely a character kind of that modeled after that.
Yeah, I like it how he was like this really powerful guy who could do all these crazy things in the other story, and how he was all about power and consolidation, and but he, through the most of the story, he wasn't able to do any of that.
Right.
I kind of like that, how he had this huge reputation to be something huge.
Yeah. I had him that he was there to kind of scope this out and see. We had these sister planets and seeing if he could subjugate them.
Right.
Because that was his whole deal is he had like a dozen planets that he had subjugated, but like 8 of them were like, just primitive peoples like that weren't aware of anything off world. So they were easy to control.
Right.
But then he was looking here. Here was a more advanced. He was kind of scoping it out to see, if he could wow them and subjugate them. But so he entered in, but not as forcefully as he would normally like to.
Right. I think that. Go, Seth.
I was gonna say, kind of towards the end, I had like not that I don't think we ever mentioned it in either the New Dawn or this one, but it had kind of a feeling. I mean, you said One Piece. There was a little bit of that kind of anime storyline going on.
Yeah.
But then particularly like the Gurren Lagann.
Oh yeah.
That's it, where it's like, kind of starts out and like kind of who's really the bad guy keeps changing as like the scope of what's really going on gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah, absolutely. Gurren Lagann, that's a really good one. That's one I had forgotten about, but that is kind of an inspiration too, I suppose. I think that, I've been watching Brandon Sanderson does these kind of lectures at the school that he went to. He does these lectures and about writing, about, do you want to write for a job? And I was watching them and thinking about last year doing the short story, which I'm still working on editing. And I was thinking, I kind of want to do that again. I know I've got this plan to do the what's it called? To do the kind of multiverse. Yeah, the whole multiverse thing where I listen to every single episode that we've made and make a giant spreadsheet about how most of them or all of them are connected. But I think I've decided that this world is the story that I want to start writing again.
Cool.
It's interesting enough. It's got a couple of interesting sort of aspects to it, and you could write a prologue like before the giant war. You could write a present day, which is a sequel to that, which is the New Dawn, and then you could write the third part in the trilogy, which is the Fallen Sky. guy. And it's like, it might be biting off more than I can chew to say I'm going to write a trilogy of novels, but
Yeah.
making this podcast was biting off more than I can chew, So it's a thing I think I'm going to start working on. And I like the story enough, and there's enough sort of contributing factors to it. It's not just, oftentimes we make these stories and they really feel like one-off ideas, where this one feels kind of concrete and interesting enough to not be that. So
And I think too, you could have such a array of split off where, like, you take like all the side stories that could come up from the second planet.
right,
Where
absolutely,
the all the different heroes you could have, in their own little stories that wouldn't exactly rearrange any of the bigger story, but you could follow, different characters throughout literally a couple millennia as they're establishing on both planets, really
right.
inside of everything that kind of goes on without touching or altering, something with I say the main timeline. But
Yeah. I was thinking I got my story element in the beginning of the New Dawn was kind of just setting up the that planet, and I was using very clearly from McCaffrey's Dragon Riders of Pern,
Right.
where they had this planet had literally been colonized, right? And it was a space mission, and they set up and they but they hadn't accounted. They had this erratic planet that every 200 years or in some cases 400 years, if it didn't get close enough on one pass, it would come, its gravitational field would raise havoc on Pern, and it would have a lot of seismic activity and earthquakes and volcanoes and stuff, and their whole base camp, so to speak, was just practically obliterated, right? And they just fled, and the northern continent across kind of a sea, a Mediterranean like sized body of water. They had the whole thing with fighting the threads, which were these parasites that would jump across from this erratic planet in the form of spores that would come to life when they entered the atmosphere, and then they would just devour anything living, And so they would build strongholds in the rocks, in the mountains, in the northern continent, like get rid of anything green. So they had stone structures, and it developed into kind of a medieval feudal system.
Right.
And they had lost over the generations, the old machinery quit working, and they were just on kind of a medieval technological level, anyway, it was just that was where I was going with that part of the story, is that you had this, because of this erratic planet, every 40 years you'd have this upheaval of
Kind of a reset.
seismic activity, so you
Right.
couldn't really develop anything around the equator, for example, and the population was huddled on the islands, and then the northern more stable continent, and they were kind of just not enough population. They're still in the total settling and exploring mode rather than holding what they had and having wars to keep it, right?
Yeah, it's a motif that I really like. I was just thinking when Reed was talking about this, I was just thinking about like this is gonna sound weird, but like Naruto, right?
Yeah.
In Naruto, they've got like ninjas and they fight with swords and chakra, and they've got like thatched houses and wood and stuff like that. But yet they've got like radios and power lines running electricity.
Right.
This whole idea of like certain things we forgot and certain things just kind of kept functioning, so we kept using. Like you have the Seabiscuit, which is this like ancient piece of technology with this, really valuable metal, kind of salt metal, whatever. I just came up with the name. It's called salt metal. We've woven throughout it, and it's like really technologically advanced, but
they're still sail driven.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Something about the juxtaposition of those two things I find I really like a lot. And then you take that kind of one step further when you go over to the other planet and everything is so terrible, but like just under the surface, there's like all of these technologies. There's a control module for a giant thing. There's huge pieces of this firmament where it's like, okay, this is a big piece of glass. Did something put this up there at some point? Like all these unanswered questions. I I'm a real sucker for the sort of the combination of that post-apocalyptic kind of right when humanity starts to get back on its feet, but yet there's still symbols and still remnants of the apocalypse.
Yeah.
Like that whole thing, it really gives me the fizz when it comes to storytelling and stuff. It's so interesting to me because it's like it speaks to ancient knowledge and old things that were real and powerful before we knew about them, you know?
Right.
But
One aspect of this story, both through the original and through the sequel, is that back in the New Dawn, I'd introduced the unique vehicle was this ship, Seabiscuit. Of course, I called it something else, and I kept trying to correct you guys, and you kept calling it Seabiscuit. So I just finally just wrote in Seabiscuit and acquiesced to the fact that yes, it was in fact the Seabiscuit.
was it the Sea Sprinter? Was
No,
it the
no,
Wind Spirit?
Yeah,
it was
Ocean
The-
Flyer.
no. Well, first of all, the wise old woman was the captain, and she was Windsong. That's her name, and
Yeah.
and the ship was the Ocean Flyer, but it
See,
just became Seabiscuit.
That's the problem, is that her name was too close. Wind Song, Ocean Flyer.
Yeah,
See, now that you call it the Wind Flyer, I think about maybe the ship was like a, what's it called? Had like a hydrofoil,
oh yeah,
you know? So like if you get it going, it comes up on this hydrofoil
comes
and then
up on plane.
then it
Yeah,
really starts to fly.
yeah,
And that would add into the whole thing of it being sailing across the sand in the next planet.
yeah.
So retroactively, the Seabiscuit has a hydrofoil.
Have you ever watched any of those like catamaran races?
Yeah, they're
Wh-
insane.
Where like they have those. They have for stability. They have like a few feet down. They have like a hydrofoil, and when they get like really whipping in the wind, and they get up on plane, and they literally lift completely out of the water, and are just like surfing along, skimming oh, that just fascinates me.
Yeah, the whole technology, the whole science of sailing is always something that's really interesting to me. It's like when you sail a ship, people who are sailors can correct me if I'm wrong. You're not just what's the word? You're not just using the air to push you,
Right.
right? The air is pushing you, and especially if you have a keeled ship, it's pushing against the resistance of the water, and you're
Yes.
slipping through the water,
Yeah.
which is how you can tack with the wind coming towards you.
Right.
You can't tack with the wind coming towards you, but you can still tack like almost directly.
Like 15 or 20 degrees.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because you can still get that slippage of the wind hitting, and as long as your mast is connected to the keel, it provides that sort of resistance that allows it to slip. So that means I think that if the gravity was low enough on this other planet, you could sail through and your machine was made correctly. You could sail through sand dunes depending on, a lot of other scientific things that doesn't matter because this is a fantasy story.
You know what I thought of? I have just watched a TV series or kind of, I guess, a remake, but a TV series based off the novel Shogun.
Right.
And in the beginning, they had a really interesting graphic. They would do these cutesy, like sand table kinds of art where they would have representations of the buildings, and then they had the ocean, and then they would have these sailing ships going through this manicured rippled sand, and I thought it was such a cool effect, and that's what I thought of when you guys introduced that element or that notion.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Another thing, I've been sitting here, right in front of me in Levi's studio is a really cool logo of Special Export, and part of their logo is a painting of the Cutty Sark, which was there's a scotch named after it, but it was like a clipper ship, where they'd have just seemingly acres and acres of canvas, and they could really wail on those things.
Yeah, sailing, that's a thing I'd love to learn how to do someday. Maybe once I turn 50, I'll have the time and the energy to do sailing. Oh, I'd probably be really tired once I turn 50. Anyways.
No, 50 ain't bad. I was still relatively spry at 50. I'm less so now. I'm not as.
I hope I'm relatively spry at 50.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. Any other interesting ideas, guys? Any interesting observations about the world?
This was a fun story, guys. I really enjoyed being in it.
Yeah, me too. I thought it was great. I'm excited to see where it goes. We've already drawn story elements and no one got sequel, so unfortunately this isn't a trilogy for us. But I'm excited to see what I can do with this story in the coming months as I try and write some more about it. Thanks everybody for joining us for this recap episode of Wait It Gets Better. If you enjoy these episodes, if you enjoy this podcast, we'd love to hear from you. Send us an email at waititgetsbettercast@gmail.com or message us on Twitter at @getsbettercast. We can be found on all podcast platforms. If you want a direct download link, just send me an email. I got you. And until next time, just wait, it's getting better.